I opened my eyes to white ceilings and the sharp scent of antiseptic, but the real sting was the silence. No visitors, no family. There was a cold hum in the air, the kind that seeps into your bones when no one said your name in weeks. The ceiling tiles blurred and sharpened, like my brain couldn't decide if I was really awake. A sharp prick along my arm reminded me I was hooked to something. IV, maybe. Machines blinked softly to my left. My mouth was dry, tongue sandpaper. I tried to speak, but only coughed, hoarse and small. A nurse appeared in the corner of my vision, her steps careful, eyes wide when she saw me alert. "You're awake," she said softly, almost like she didn't want to scare me. She pressed the call button behind me, then adjusted the pillows. "How long?" I croaked. 27 days, she answered, voice gentle but even. "You've been in a medically induced coma. Your vitals stabilized a few days ago. We weren't sure when you'd wake." My chest tightened, not just from the medical jargon, but from a deeper ache that had nothing to do with broken bones or bruised lungs. My family. Did they come? The nurse hesitated. That pause, one heartbeat too long, said everything. "No," she said finally, careful. "No one visited, not from the hospital's records." I stared at her, throat tightening. "No one?" She swallowed, a flicker of discomfort in her eyes. "There was one person. She wasn't listed as family, wouldn't even leave her name. But she stayed the first week. Sat next to you and read from a book, I think. Then she left." I blinked slowly, trying to absorb what she'd said, but it only bounced off the fog in my mind. "Not my mother?" The nurse gave a tight, apologetic smile. "No." The ache shifted into something colder. Anger? No, too soon for that. What I felt was hollowness, a vacuum where the warmth of my family should have been. Dr. Patel arrived a few minutes later, his expression both relieved and burdened. "Rachel," he greeted. "Welcome back. You've been through a lot. We had to repair a collapsed lung and several fractures. But you're stable now. The important thing is, you're alive." I tried to nod but winced instead. "Doctor, why didn't they come?" He glanced at the nurse, then at the chart in his hands. "That's something we should talk about when you're stronger." "I'm strong enough," I whispered. Silence. Then he gave a faint sigh and sat down on the rolling stool beside me. "Your emergency contact, Mrs. Mitchell, was informed immediately after the accident. She and your father arrived that night. They asked for updates, reviewed your chart, then left. They never came back." The words hit me like the SUV had all over again. Sudden, shattering, absurd. Dr. Patel flipped to the back of the chart and hesitated again. "This wasn't meant for you to see yet, but I think you'll find out anyway." He handed the folder to the nurse. "Give her a copy of her discharge notes." The nurse, whose badge read Emily, quietly printed several pages and placed them in a folder. When she handed it to me, my fingers curled around it tightly. I was too weak to sit up, too exhausted to read. But I clutched the folder like it might vanish. "You'll be here another 2 days, Max," Dr. Patel continued. "We'll coordinate post-care. If you have a friend or someone to stay with." "What if I don't?" I asked. "What happens then?" His pause told me he had expected that question. After 30 days of no contact, the hospital typically coordinates with the state for patient placement. The folder on my lap felt heavier suddenly, as though it held more than papers. I fumbled it open and caught a line scribbled in black ink at the back of the chart. Next of kin declined further contact. Patient to be discharged to state custody if no improvement by 30 days. No contact. Not unable to. Not couldn't afford. Declined. Everything inside me turned still. I was astray. Discarded like an obligation past its due date. Not even worth a funeral plan. Just a name on a page, a bed taking up space, a mouth too expensive to keep breathing. I didn't cry. That would have given them something. Instead, I lay there, numb, holding that sentence like a blade I planned to sharpen. Emily stepped closer, her voice soft. But someone else saw that chart too, and took you home instead. I should have been angry, but I felt numb until she walked in. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. The room was too quiet, and the painkillers they gave me were still warping the edges of sound. But when the soft footsteps approached my bedside and I caught the scent of lavender, real, warm, soothing, I knew she was real. She wore a purple scarf tied neatly around her neck, the color rich against her cream blouse and ash blonde hair. Her eyes, an arresting slate gray, met mine with something close to sorrow. Or was it relief? "Hello, Rachel," she said gently, taking the chair beside my bed as if she'd always belonged there. My throat tightened. I didn't know what to say. Her voice tugged at something in the back of my memory, but it didn't fully connect. "You're the woman who stayed?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, I was there the first week after your accident, when they left you." Her tone didn't flinch at the word they, but mine did. "Why?" I whispered. "Because I owed your mother," she replied. "Your real mother." My chest clenched. Not Julie Mitchell, the woman who raised me like an obligation. She meant the one whose face I only saw in an old, faded photograph buried deep in a box I wasn't supposed to open. "You knew her?" I asked. "I did. I was her friend. We met in college. She was the wild one. I was the one with laminated notes and backup plans." She chuckled softly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Then you came along and everything changed." I couldn't speak. The weight of her presence, the softness in her voice, the way she looked at me like I wasn't a burden, it all disarmed me. I felt like a child again, not in weakness, but in confusion. "I thought she didn't have anyone," I said quietly. "That's what I was told. That after she died, no one wanted me." Evelyn's lips pressed into a line. That wasn't true, but things were complicated. I wasn't in a position to intervene. Not then. I looked away. The shame curled under my skin, tight and bitter. "Why now?" She reached for a glass of water on the nightstand and placed it gently into my hands. "Because now I can." I took a sip, though my hands trembled. The room was unlike the hospital. Soft beige walls, thick curtains letting filtered sun spill in. The faint scent of lavender clinging to the air like a promise. This wasn't a place you stumbled into. This was a place you were chosen to be in. Evelyn studied me for a moment, then said, "After the hospital, I had you moved here. It was time you were cared for properly." I blinked. "You paid for this?" She nodded. "All of it." "Why?" There was no hesitation. "Because you're not disposable." My throat ached, and not from the accident. No one had ever said that to me. Not in those words, not with that conviction. "You don't even know me," I muttered. "I know enough," she replied. "And I knew your mother. That's enough for me." I stared down at the knitted blanket that covered my legs. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe someone could care like that. But I'd spent too long convincing myself I wasn't worth the effort. "What happened to you?" Evelyn said softly. "Shouldn't have happened to anyone. But it did. And now it's up to you what happens next." She stood and walked to the window, drawing the curtain open a little more. "You'll heal here. We'll talk more when you're stronger." I nodded faintly. My body felt like a borrowed thing. Too heavy, too fragile. But her words lit something in me that hadn't flickered in a long time. Hope, maybe? Or at least the idea that hope was possible. A girl peeked into the room then, young, maybe 10, with bright eyes and an unreadable expression. Evelyn glanced over. "Claire, come say hello." The girl hesitated, then offered me a small wave. I waved back, awkward but sincere. Then she vanished down the hall as quickly as she came. "She's shy," Evelyn explained. But she's part of this house too. I looked back at her. Is she yours? In every way that matters, Evelyn said simply. We sat in silence for a moment, the quiet not oppressive, just full. Then Evelyn's voice cut through, low and measured. Rachel, I need to tell you something, but not all of it. Not yet. What is it? I asked. Her eyes lingered on the fireplace mantel, where an old clock ticked patiently. When you were unconscious, your parents, Julie and Ron, they didn't just abandon you. They assumed you'd die. So they made plans. I felt the breath leave my body. What plans? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. But Evelyn didn't answer. Instead, she stepped over to a side table, opened a drawer, and pulled out a letter sealed in cream-colored stationery. She handed it to me with both hands like it was something sacred. Not yet, she said. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy, and smelled faintly of vanilla. My name was written in sharp cursive. I placed it on the side table next to the lavender tea Evelyn had left for me. Every time I glanced in its direction, my pulse picked up. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the weight of meaning. That envelope represented something I hadn't had in a long time. A future. I'd been carrying it with me for days, moving it from room to room, even to the garden. Yet I couldn't bring myself to break the seal. Evelyn hadn't said not to open it. Just not yet. But that cryptic command clung to me, stopping my fingers every time they hovered over the flap. By late April, I could finally move without help. A cane steadied me on most days, and the air in the garden had begun to warm. Sunlight filtered through the climbing roses that laced the trellis, and Claire had taken to bringing her sketchbook outside, sitting near but never too close. We were learning each other's boundaries by unspoken agreement. That morning, she slid into the chair opposite mine, legs tucked beneath her. She didn't look up as she spoke. You've been staring at that envelope for 4 days. I smiled despite myself. It's patient. She shrugged. It won't bite. You don't know that. She laughed, and I was surprised at how much I liked the sound. Claire was sharp in the way only children who've seen too much become. Careful, quiet, watchful. But she was also brave. I used to be scared of things in envelopes, she said after a pause. Court dates, reports, letters from social workers. But now I think the only way to take power back is to open them before they open you. I blinked at her. That's very wise. She grinned. I read it in a book, but I pretended I made it up. We sat in companionable silence for a while, broken only by the wind ruffling the tulips Evelyn had planted last spring. When Claire spoke again, it was in that low, knowing tone children use when they're about to say something important. Did you know Evelyn changed her will? My gaze snapped to hers. No. Claire nodded. A few weeks ago, the lawyer came. I was eavesdropping from the top of the stairs. She said she didn't trust her old family anymore. Something cold curled in my gut. What did she change? Claire shrugged. I don't know everything, but I think it has to do with you. Evelyn hadn't mentioned any of this. Since moving me in, she'd oscillated between maternal warmth and guarded silence. There was always love in her gestures. Soft blankets, stocked bookshelves, fresh flowers, but rarely explanations. It was as if she were waiting for me to catch up to something she already knew. That afternoon, I found myself alone in the library. Sunlight streamed through tall windows and pooled on the Persian rug. The letter was still in my hand. I turned it over once more. My name stared back at me, unwavering. I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper, folded neatly, and a small packet of documents bound by a gold clip. My hands shook as I opened the letter. Dear Rachel, if you're reading this, I didn't survive to see you wake up. I hope I did. God, I hope I did. But I've learned not to leave important things unsaid. I knew your mother. I loved her as my sister, though we shared no blood. When she died, I should have come for you. I didn't. I told myself it was out of respect for legal processes, for the new family that took you in. But I lied. I was scared. I let fear rob me of something precious. Time with you. So this letter is my attempt to give back what I still can. I've named you my sole heir. Not because of pity, not because of guilt, but because you are the only one left who still knows how to love without conditions. I had to stop reading. My eyes blurred with tears I hadn't planned to shed. No one had ever said things like that to me. No one had ever meant them. I wiped my face and continued. The packet enclosed contains the transfer of a trust fund that will allow you freedom, the deed to this home, and a letter for the people who left you behind. You don't owe them anything, Rachel. But if you ever decide to confront them, I want you to have the upper hand. Love, Evelyn. My breath trembled as I unfolded the clipped documents. Legal language, signatures, notarizations, all real. The trust fund alone was more money than I'd seen in a lifetime. But it wasn't the numbers that shook me. It was what they meant. I wasn't powerless anymore. Then I found the second letter, sealed like the first, but addressed not to me, to Julie and Ron Mitchell. I stared at the names, my hands clenched. Whatever Evelyn had written to them, it was now in my hands. And that changed everything. It took only 5 days for them to crawl out of the woodwork. I had sent the letter without ceremony. No note, no return address, just Evelyn's final words to the people who had left me to die. I didn't expect a response. I certainly didn't expect them. Not in person. Not this soon. But ghosts don't like to be disinherited. May 1st arrived warm and overcast. Whitman's office sat on the top floor of a low-rise building overlooking the marina. The windows were tall, the air smelled like old paper and lemon oil, and the chairs were just uncomfortable enough to remind you where you were. I had come to finalize the transfer documents. Just paperwork, I told myself. Nothing dramatic. Whitman greeted me with his usual unreadable expression. He was a man carved from marble. Tailored suits, trimmed beard, a voice like a closing vault. "Good morning, Miss Hartwell," he said, ushering me into the conference room. "We'll begin shortly." That's when I saw them. Charles and Denise Mitchell were seated at the far end of the table. Denise's lips were pressed into a perfect pink line, her eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. Indoors, as always. Charles had his arms folded tightly across his chest, jaw set like he was preparing for a firing squad. The sight of them made my stomach lurch. I stopped at the threshold, fingers tightening around my cane. What are they doing here? Whitman didn't flinch. They insisted on being present, claimed they had a legal interest. I allowed it, for clarity. Charles stood. "Rachel," he said, spreading his hands like we were meeting for coffee, not war. "You look..." "Well?" I didn't respond. Denise finally removed her glasses, revealing eyes that shone with tears I couldn't trust. "We were devastated when we heard," she said, voice tremulous. "The hospital told us you didn't make it. We grieved." Whitman leaned back in his chair. "That is fascinating, because the hospital records clearly show both of you signing off on declining further contact." Charles bristled. "That was a miscommunication. We were in shock. It was a chaotic night." 27 nights, I corrected. "I was unconscious for almost a month, and not once did you come." Denise blinked rapidly. "We thought it was best to let the professionals handle it. We didn't want to interfere with your care." Whitman's fingers tapped once on the mahogany table. "So your absence, lack of financial support, and refusal to return hospital calls were all strategy?" Charles turned toward him. "We're not here to be interrogated." "Then why are you here?" I asked flatly. They exchanged a glance, and Denise inhaled sharply. "We were shocked," she said slowly, "to learn that Evelyn Hartwell has rewritten her estate." "Shocked," Charles echoed, as if repeating it made it truer. "She was an old woman, vulnerable, lonely, not of sound mind." Whitman's smile was microscopic but lethal. Interesting, because we have video documentation of her signing those documents, along with a medical competency evaluation from a state-certified psychiatrist, dated 3 weeks prior to her passing. Denise stiffened. You don't understand. She barely knew Rachel. They hadn't spoken in years. And yet, Whitman replied, folding his hands, she chose to make Rachel her heir. That's the only part the law is interested in. Charles's eyes narrowed. We raised her, clothed her, fed her, sacrificed for her. Sacrificed? My voice cracked before I could stop it. You abandoned me, in a hospital bed. You thought I'd die. Denise's tears finally spilled. Whether from guilt or strategy, I couldn't say. We did our best, she whispered. You don't know what it was like trying to raise a child that wasn't. She cut herself off, but the words were already alive in the room. I stepped back, cold crawling up my spine. Charles reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila envelope. With one sharp motion, he tossed it across the table. You're not even blood, he said, each word a nail. We raised you. You owe us. The room went still. Even the air held its breath. Whitman calmly leaned forward and opened the envelope. He flipped through the contents slowly, deliberately. Then he pulled out a stack of glossy photos and spread them across the table like a poker hand. And then he smirked. You might want to rethink that approach. They thought I was weak because I didn't speak, but I was listening. I let Charles and Denise spin their stories, watched them cry their crocodile tears across Whitman's polished table, heard every rehearsed line about love and sacrifice. But while they played their roles, I was studying the pauses, the deflections, the cracks in their script. They underestimated silence. Silence, after all, is where truth often hides. Back in Evelyn's townhouse, I claimed a small study that overlooked the courtyard roses. The desk had belonged to her late husband, a judge, and the drawers were still lined with his scent, old leather and cedar. I filled the space with files, printouts, and stacks of paper highlighted in neon. It looked nothing like healing. It looked like war. The day after the confrontation at Whitman's office, I picked up the hospital discharge file again. There, tucked between billing statements and blood test summaries, was a scribbled note. Nurse Emily Clark present at 3:42 p.m. when patient's guardians declined extended care. My heart kicked. Emily. She had been the one who told me I'd been unconscious for 27 days. She had mentioned a woman who wasn't my mother. She had been kind in that detached, overworked nurse kind of way, and apparently she had witnessed it all. I called the hospital and was told she'd left 6 months prior. But a few calls through Evelyn's network, a retired state senator owed her a favor, it turned out, landed me an email. Within a day, Emily responded, agreeing to meet me at a cafe 2 towns over. She looked tired but strong, dressed in soft denim and a pale cardigan. When she saw me approach with my cane, she stood and helped me into the booth. I wasn't sure you'd remember me, she said. I remembered your voice, I replied. She nodded. You've been through a lot. I need to ask about something I think you might have kept, I said. Back then, you mentioned a journal. She stiffened slightly. I don't share that. It's not official record. I know, but it might be the only thing that can help me prove what really happened. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she reached into her bag and handed over a small, spiral-bound notebook, worn soft at the edges. I only kept it that year. Too many losses. I had to write things down to keep my mind clear. Back at the townhouse, I sat cross-legged on the study floor and began flipping through pages. There, scrawled in Emily's tight, rushed handwriting, was the entry. April 3rd, 3:42 p.m. Guardians, Charles and Denise M., arrived, met with admin. Signed non-responsibility form. Declined further contact unless status changes. Security camera number 14 recorded hallway view. I stared at the page for a long time, the blood in my ears roaring like wind. The footage. It existed, or at least it had. Claire found me there an hour later, curled over a stack of papers, my hand cramping from writing notes. She didn't say anything, just pulled up a chair, laid out a fresh legal pad, and started reading over my shoulder. "You don't have to help," I murmured. She didn't look up. "I want to." I couldn't explain the comfort of her presence, the strange steadiness of having someone so small, so quiet, sit beside me without needing explanations. She had seen abandonment too, and maybe that was enough to make her understand. Using Evelyn's connections, I sent a formal request to Saint, Martha Memorial's legal department, for archived security footage from the day in question. I didn't expect them to say yes, but I wasn't asking. I was invoking a clause Evelyn had tucked into the medical trust that funded several wings of the hospital. The reply came within 2 days. Encrypted file, no commentary. I waited until after dinner, after the house was still. Then Claire and I sat in the study. I clicked play. The video showed the waiting room outside ICU. April 3rd, time-stamped 3:41 p.m. Charles and Denise sat for a few minutes. Charles fidgeted. Denise stared at her nails. Then an administrator arrived with a clipboard. They both stood. They both signed. I watched the moment Charles handed the pen back and turned his back on the corridor leading to my room. Then they walked away. No hesitation, no glance over the shoulder. Claire watched with her jaw clenched tight. She said nothing, but her knuckles were white against the armrest. I clicked pause, took a screenshot, saved it under 3 separate file names. I didn't need more proof, but I wanted it. Later that night, I drafted the email. Short, precise, and final. Subject: Hartwell Estate Inquiry. To Whitman at cranelegal.com. Body: I have something. I think it's time we make this public. Rachel. The footage didn't just show abandonment. It showed intent. That was the line Whitman opened with. His tone even, but the weight of his words unmistakable. The video played in a loop on the screen behind him. Charles and Denise rising, signing, walking away without so much as a glance toward ICU. If there had ever been a question of doubt, it was now a corpse on the table. Mid-May brought a strange heat for spring, but Whitman and Rowe's conference room was a fortress of air conditioning and legal jargon. The walls were lined with shelves of thick binders and litigation guides, and a whiteboard in the corner already had my name underlined in black ink. Rachel Hartwell versus Charles and Denise Mitchell. I sat at the long table, fingers laced tightly in my lap, willing my nerves into stillness. Amanda, Whitman's paralegal, looked barely 25 but moved with the precision of a woman twice her age. Her laptop clicked furiously as she compiled timestamps, citations, and coded file names like weapons in an arsenal. Neglect, Whitman said, tapping the table once. It's a civil claim, but in this context, with documented intent, the nurse's statement, and Evelyn's letter, we may be able to escalate. I glanced at Claire, who sat quietly in the corner, arms folded across her chest. She hadn't said a word since we arrived, but I felt her gaze anchor me. Keep me upright. I don't want to ruin them, I murmured. Whitman tilted his head. Miss Hartwell, this isn't about revenge. It's about pattern, behavior, and protecting your legal position. The moment they stepped foot into my office demanding Evelyn's estate, they made this a war. You're not burning bridges. You're building walls they can't climb again. Amanda spun her screen toward us. We've reviewed the consent forms signed at the hospital. There are 2 inconsistencies. One form is blank where Charles was supposed to sign, and another has a signature that doesn't match hospital records. We've already sent them for forensic verification. My stomach tightened. Forgery? Possibly. Or negligence so gross it might as well be, she replied. Whitman leaned forward, fingers steepled. The point is, Rachel, you have the power to set the narrative now. Do you want to keep reacting or start acting? My mind raced. All the years I'd been made to feel like an outsider in my own life. All the times Denise had smiled sweetly while icing me out of family photos. Charles patting my shoulder like I was a stray they'd taken in out of pity. They didn't expect me to wake up. That much was clear. Then what's next? I asked. Amanda slid over a folder of documents. Formal letters of intent to challenge the Mitchells' inheritance claims, and paperwork appointing Whitman as executor proxy in future filings. All we need, she said, is your signature. The pen trembled slightly in my grasp, but I signed. Every page. Halfway through, Amanda's phone buzzed. She frowned, tapped a few buttons, then said, I just got the voicemail transcript back. The one Evelyn's investigator flagged. Whitman gestured. Play it. She put the phone on speaker. Static crackled, then a clipped, unmistakable voice filled the room. If she wakes up, Denise said coldly, we'll deal with it then. No panic, no grief, just clinical indifference. Silence settled over the room like a dropped curtain. I swallowed hard. And then I spoke. Clear, deliberate, final. Then let's deal with it now. She brought roses. And a warning. They were pale pink, perfectly trimmed, tied with a ribbon that matched the shade of her lipstick. Denise Mitchell always did have a taste for appearances. The bouquet rested in her arms like a peace offering, but the thorns were in her smile. Claire was the first to see her. From the far end of the garden room, she caught my eye, her brow tightening just slightly before she melted into the shadows near the archway. She knew better than to interrupt, but her presence was like a silent lighthouse, a reminder I wasn't alone. Rachel, Denise said, stepping in without asking. She wore a cream blouse and a silk scarf knotted just so. You look, well. I rose slowly from the window bench, not out of respect, but strategy. Standing made me her equal. I can't say the same for your timing. She chuckled, a low, motherly sound that made my skin crawl. I wasn't sure you'd take my call, so I thought I'd come in person. It's such a lovely home. Evelyn always had taste. I gestured to the chair across from me. She sat, smoothing the scarf at her throat. I heard you filed the petition, she said casually. Formal, painful, so public, but perhaps understandable, given the confusion. Confusion, I echoed. I worry about you, Rachel. Her eyes fixed on mine, voice warm like honey stirred into poison. These lawyers, people like Whitman, they don't care what this does to you. They'll drain your time, your money, your peace. All for their own agenda. You think I'm being used? I asked, watching her closely. I think, she said, folding her hands over her lap, that grief makes people vulnerable. And Evelyn, may she rest, is not here to protect you from manipulation. I smiled, small and cold. You didn't think I'd wake up, did you? Denise blinked slowly. We expected peace, she said after a pause. And you being alive complicates that. The sun spilled through the tall windows, warming the carpet, but not the air between us. You could walk away, she offered. There's still time. You'd keep your dignity. The press would lose interest. We could even make a joint statement. Family reconciled. People like that. It sells. Withdraw honorably, I said, tasting the phrase. Like a loser who pretends she was never playing. She leaned in slightly. I'm not your enemy, Rachel. I raised you. I fed you, clothed you, gave you a name. That means something. And then you left me to die, I said. What does that mean? Denise didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a folded paper, sealed in a plastic sleeve. She slid it across the table. I opened it. A scan of a court record. Denial of continued guardianship, Mitchell, Charles, and Denise. Filed April 4th, 2023. My eyes skipped down to the highlighted line. Petitioners cite emotional, financial, and familial incompatibility as reason for non-responsibility. They hadn't just abandoned me. They'd made it official. She watched me absorb it all, then spoke with that same silken grace. We did what was necessary. For us. For you. No one wants to drag this out, Rachel. So I'm asking you. Don't become the story. Don't make this your identity. I stared at her, the chill inside me growing roots. You just confirmed it, I said, voice level. I'm not your daughter anymore, legally or otherwise. She sat beside me in silence, and finally told me why she never called Evelyn Mom. The air was thick with rosemary, its scent made stronger by the warmth trapped beneath the glass panels of Evelyn's rooftop greenhouse. Tiny condensation beads clung to the panes above us, refracting the amber light of the city into shimmering veins. It was late. Everything below us had gone to sleep, but up here, the world stayed tender and unfinished. Claire had been sitting with me for almost an hour, cross-legged on the garden bench, her fingers idly tracing the grain of the cedar box between us. She hadn't said much, just sat, present in a way that felt more comforting than any words. The weight of Denise's visit still pressed behind my eyes like a bruise I couldn't see. It wasn't just the threat, or the roses, or the legal games she played. It was how easy she'd made it all sound. As if I should be grateful to walk away quietly. I shifted, trying to speak, but Claire beat me to it. I used to wonder, she said softly, if Evelyn ever truly wanted me here. I turned to her. She was staring at the string lights woven through the vines above us. She took me in when I was 12. My mom married her dad, then left a year later. Left me a year later. I think Evelyn kept me around because it would have looked worse to send me back. Her voice didn't crack, but there was a tightness to it, like each word had been sanded down before it left her mouth. I used to call her Evelyn because I thought, if I didn't get attached, she wouldn't hurt me, or maybe I wouldn't hurt her. I stayed quiet, letting her unravel it at her own pace. Claire exhaled. Then one day I saw her at a gala. A woman asked if I was her daughter, and Evelyn said, "She's the reason I still believe in trying again." Not yes. Not no. Just that. My throat caught. You ever think, Claire continued, that maybe real families aren't made of blood or papers? But choice? The ones who stay when there's nothing to gain? I nodded, too full to speak. She looked down at the box and pushed it gently toward me. I found this in Evelyn's study drawer. Locked. I think it was meant for you. The cedar box was warm from the heat of the greenhouse. I undid the latch slowly, expecting old jewelry or perhaps more legal files. Instead, envelopes. Dozens. Each one labeled in Evelyn's precise script. To Rachel, age 15. To Rachel when she graduates. To Rachel when she needs to hear my voice. They weren't sent. Weren't even opened. But each one had a date. A timeline of hope stretched across years she wasn't allowed to be part of. Claire watched me, her voice barely audible now. She always planned to be in your life, even if you never knew it. I touched the edge of the topmost letter, fingers trembling. For the first time in days, the tears came without warning and without shame. The man in the black sedan wasn't just lost. He came back 2 days in a row. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Just a guy waiting for someone, scrolling through his phone, maybe lost in the neighborhood. But when I saw him again the next morning, same time, same tree, same indifferent stare toward Evelyn's townhouse, I felt my ribs tighten around my lungs. Claire noticed it too. She didn't say anything until the third day. He's not lost, she muttered, peeking through the curtains with narrowed eyes. Don't think they'll fight back with the law. What do you mean? I mean, they're cowards, Rachel. They won't risk losing in court. They'll try to make you scared enough to quit. Her voice carried no panic, just tired conviction. By the fourth morning, I stepped outside. I didn't walk fast. I didn't glare. I just crossed the street with a slow, steady gait, cane in hand, and looked directly into the man's tinted window. He didn't flinch, but he didn't roll it down either. I memorized the license plate and called Whitman as soon as I was back inside. He answered on the second ring. Tell me this is about progress. There's a car, I said. It's been here 4 days, same guy. taking pictures, watching. Silence, then a sigh. I suspected this. They've hired someone, probably a private investigator. They're looking for dirt or for you to flinch. They won't find either. That's not the point, he said. This is psychological warfare, Rachel. They want you to feel surrounded. I glanced at Claire, who had taken to silently photographing the car from different angles with her phone. Then let's give them something to find, I said. That afternoon, I went through the binder, the one Amanda had compiled of all the hospital communications, legal documents, time-stamped forms. I found the transcript of the voicemail again, the one where Denise said, "If she wakes up, we'll deal with it then." But there was something else. A memo from the attending physician, signed off 3 days after I was admitted. Guardians unavailable. Patient marked for state custody. Contact declined by next of kin. I copied the documents, annotated the dates in red, and on a fresh flash drive, I placed an audio file Claire had helped me convert. A quiet but unmistakable clip of Denise's voice. She's not our responsibility anymore. I slid the flash drive into a plain envelope. No address, no threats, just a small sticker that read, "For your client's review." Claire didn't ask questions. She simply walked it out to the mailbox across the street and dropped it in. The man in the sedan didn't even blink. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Denise's voice in my head. Not the words, but the way she said them. Like I'd been a stray dog someone else forgot to put down. At 6:12 a.m., Claire knocked on my door, her eyes wide, holding her phone. "You need to see this." She handed it to me. The screen displayed an open browser, a legal commentary forum I didn't recognize. Front and center, an embedded audio clip, just a few seconds long. "She's not our responsibility anymore." Underneath, a single caption. "This is how families dispose of unwanted daughters. ChatGPT Jan Noy." The letter was sealed in red wax and marked, "For Rachel, only if everything falls apart." Lightning forked across the sky as I sat alone at Evelyn's desk. The storm clawed at the windows like a desperate thing, but inside the study it was silent. Eerily so. The only sound was the dull crackle of the fire behind me and the whisper of old paper as I peeled open the wax seal. My fingers trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of what I was about to read. This was the letter Evelyn said I should only open when all else failed. When there was no path forward, only a reckoning. I unfolded the thick stationery, Evelyn's familiar script curling across the page. "My darling Rachel, if you're reading this, then I've failed in one way, but perhaps not in all. I didn't raise you, but I've loved you in silence for longer than you can imagine. And now I have one last role to play. Not as your guardian, but as your weapon." I swallowed hard. The letter was dated nearly 6 months ago. "You deserve the truth, so I'll give you what your parents never would." She began with a memory, her friendship with my birth mother, Lillian. They'd met in college, survived heartbreak together, and dreamed of raising children who would never know the pain of abandonment. When my mother died suddenly, Evelyn had tried to step in, but by then, I had already been adopted by the Mitchells. "They told me you were safe, loved, and I believed them. I let go, until I saw what they'd become." My eyes stung. The next page came with a small USB drive taped to the top and a separate envelope labeled Charles Recording Transcript. I plugged it into Evelyn's old laptop and opened the file. The voice was unmistakable. "Charles, look, I signed it. So what? The kid doesn't even know what she owns. Evelyn's playing fairy godmother. Just have her sign the relinquishment and call it done. Or I'll forge it myself." I paused the clip. My lungs felt too full. I turned back to the letter. "The asset he refers to is a plot of land in Willow Creek. Your mother's inheritance to you. They never told you. They couldn't, because it wasn't theirs to take. So they buried it." I flipped to the final page. "Justice doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes from hearing the truth, out loud with no apology. If you speak it, they lose. Not because you win, but because you survive. The door creaked open behind me. I turned, startled, but it was only Claire. Her hair was damp from the storm, her eyes wide but calm. "I thought you might need this," she said, handing me a plastic folder. Inside was Evelyn's psychiatric contract, dated, signed, and stamped, certifying her mental fitness just 3 weeks before the will was updated. "She knew they'd come after it," Claire said quietly. "She wanted to make sure you had backup." I looked down at my hands. One held the contract, the other the transcript. Evidence. Truth. Fire. "Tomorrow," I whispered, "we go to court." I didn't walk into that courtroom to win. I walked in so they'd never lie about me again. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as I stepped into courtroom 2B. It was colder than I expected. Maybe that was just me. Numb, not from fear, but from the weight of what I carried. In my satchel were 3 things: Evelyn's letter, the hospital security footage, and the transcript that would snap something in Charles Mitchell that he couldn't glue back together. The bench was long and polished, reflecting the gray light filtering through half-closed blinds. Whitman stood beside me, a calm force in a navy suit, his file folder so thick it looked ready to crack open secrets like eggs. Claire sat behind us in the gallery, hands folded in her lap, eyes trained on the Mitchells. They sat across the aisle, Charles in a tailored jacket he probably didn't pay for, Denise in pearls and a smug little smirk. Victoria, my adoptive sister, wore all black. Not mourning, posturing. The judge called us to order. His voice was firm but dispassionate. "This court will now hear arguments in the matter of Evelyn Hartwell's will and the objection filed by Charles and Denise Mitchell." Denise stood first. She didn't look at me, which was smart. I would have stared her down like a scalpel. "Your Honor," she began smoothly, "we are deeply saddened by the passing of Evelyn Hartwell. However, it is clear that Ms. Hartwell was not of sound mind when she changed her will. My husband and I raised Rachel. We love her, but we cannot stand by while our family is erased from what was rightfully ours." I didn't blink. I didn't twitch. I simply waited. Charles stood next. "Rachel has been unwell, medically, emotionally. She cannot be expected to manage something as complex as an estate. And the fact remains, she legally relinquished her claim years ago. We have the paperwork." Whitman rose then, slow and unhurried. "If the court will allow," he said, "we'd like to submit evidence to the contrary." The judge nodded. Whitman turned to me, gestured. I pulled Evelyn's letter from my bag. My fingers barely shook. "I'll read a portion," I said softly. "Per Ms. Hartwell's explicit instructions." I unfolded the paper. "You deserve the truth," I began. "The land your mother left you was never theirs to take. And yet they buried it. Because they didn't think you'd survive. Because if you did, it would ruin their plans." I looked up. Denise's face twitched. The judge tilted his head. "Continue." "Justice doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes from hearing the truth, out loud, with no apology." I handed the letter to Whitman, who placed it neatly into the record file. "Additionally," he said, producing a flash drive, "this is a recording between Mr. Mitchell and an unnamed third party. It concerns forged relinquishment documents." He pressed play. Charles's voice filled the courtroom. "Look, I signed it. So what? The kid doesn't even know what she owns. Just have her sign the form and call it done. Or I'll forge it myself." A ripple of silence followed, then murmurs. The judge lifted his gavel and tapped it once. "Is this verified?" "It is," Whitman replied. "Time-stamped, authenticated. The voice has been matched by 2 independent analysts." The judge looked at Charles, who opened his mouth, then closed it again. Denise reached into her bag, but whatever she meant to pull out, she changed her mind. The judge turned to me. "Do you have anything further, Ms. Hartwell?" I stood straighter. "Only this. I didn't survive to be erased. I survived to be heard." He nodded once. "Evidence admitted. The court will review the submission." I sat, pulse loud in my ears. A silence fell, sharp and final, until Denise leaned into Charles and hissed, "You promised she wouldn't wake up." And I heard every word. I didn't need them to remember me as their daughter. I needed them to remember what they did. The second day of the hearing dawned with a sense of quiet combustion. I stood in front of the mirror that morning, tying my hair back with trembling fingers. The courthouse was already filling with the kind of people who didn't know me yesterday, but would leave today with opinions etched into their bones. Reporters flanked the entrance like vultures, their lenses tilted at angles meant to catch collapse. But I wasn't collapsing. Not this time. Inside, courtroom 2B buzzed with whispers, shifting feet, flickering camera flashes through the open door. Charles sat stiff, hands clasped, jaw set in iron. Denise had applied a fresh coat of lipstick, her pearls glowing like tiny nooses. Victoria looked smaller today, or maybe the bench had grown around her. I didn't care. Claire sat in the gallery again, this time closer. She gave a subtle nod as I approached the stand. I didn't nod back. I simply placed a USB drive on the table in front of the judge. Whitman cleared his throat. "With the court's permission, we would like to enter additional recordings into evidence." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Of what nature?" "Private calls, legally recorded, all involving Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell speaking with the plaintiff." The room quieted. I stepped forward, my voice steady. "This one was from 2 weeks after I woke up. Charles didn't know I had the phone on speaker." Whitman pressed play. Charles's voice crackled over the speakers. "Her name on the deed doesn't matter. The house is ours. She can't even walk straight. What's she gonna do, sue us?" Gasps. Audible now. I looked at Charles. He blinked rapidly, then tried to look confused, as if his own voice had turned against him. Denise's mouth opened, then shut. Whitman held up another flash drive. "Next item, Your Honor. Video file. This one was recorded in St. Martha's intake bay. The defendant, Denise Mitchell, is speaking to a hospital staff member." It played. On screen, Denise leaned over a clipboard, annoyed. "If she dies, we'll tell people we did our best. She was always fragile." Someone in the audience gasped. Another whispered, "Oh my God." The judge raised a hand for silence. I turned slowly toward Denise, who had gone pale under her makeup. Her shoulders squared like someone bracing for a blow that never lands the way they expect. Claire stood up from her seat in the back row. She walked, deliberate and unhurried, down the aisle. She carried something. Evelyn's letter, printed and sealed. "Per Evelyn Hartwell's final instructions," Claire said, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. "This letter is to be submitted if further deception by the Mitchells arises." The judge took it, read the heading, and handed it to his clerk. "What's in that letter?" Denise asked sharply, turning to Whitman. He didn't reply. He didn't have to. The judge turned his gaze on the Mitchells, both now visibly shaken. "At this point," he said, slow and deliberate, "there is enough evidence to suspend the Mitchells' inheritance claim entirely. This court recognizes that substantial misrepresentation may have occurred. An independent investigation will follow." The gavel did not fall, but something else did. Victoria broke. Her sobs filled the room. Not graceful, not silent, just raw and childish, like someone who'd finally realized no one was coming to save her side. Denise tried to comfort her, but Victoria jerked away. Charles didn't move. I turned back to my chair, lowering myself slowly, deliberately, folding my hands in my lap. Claire reached for mine, but I didn't need the touch to be steady. I whispered, so only she could hear. "We're not done yet." My mother burned me with silence, but my father carved the rules that let it happen. The conference room was smaller than the courtroom, quieter, colder, with walls too white and a table too long for the number of people present. It was supposed to be a post-hearing mediation, a space to resolve outstanding contentions. But the air was heavy with something closer to judgment than discussion. I sat across from Charles, not beside him, never again beside him. Denise was next to him, uncharacteristically silent. Her hands clutched the straps of her purse like a lifeline, her gaze fixed on the table's grain. She hadn't spoken all morning. Whitman laid a stack of documents between us, the sound crisp, deliberate. Property transaction records from March 2023, deed transfers, signatures in Rachel's name. Charles didn't even blink. She gave verbal consent. She was recovering and confused, but she said yes. I leaned forward. I was in a coma. He waved a hand as if batting away a fly. You weren't completely unreachable. We made decisions in your best interest. I looked at Whitman. Show him. Whitman opened the slim laptop beside him and played a muted video. It showed Charles in the lawyer's office months ago, alone with a legal assistant. He leaned over a set of documents, pen in hand, signing. Not his name. Mine. The video had no audio, but the evidence was louder than any voice in the room. Denise's eyes widened. Her hand moved slightly, as if she might reach for him. But she thought better of it. Claire stepped forward from her seat near the wall. We cross-checked the property sale against Evelyn Hartwell's accounts. The wire transfer was split into 3 holdings, 2 offshore. She opened a folder. Here are the bank routing numbers. One of them links to a fund in Charles's name. Charles's voice sharpened. You have no right. We have a subpoena. Whitman cut in coolly. Silence fell. Then the door opened and the judge stepped in. Not robed now, just wearing the dark suit of finality. He carried a leather binder and a narrow envelope. He nodded at me, then at Whitman. I've reviewed the documents submitted this morning. Ms. Hartwell, thank you for your cooperation. Then he turned to Charles. Mr. Mitchell, based on this evidence, this court finds reasonable grounds to recommend criminal investigation into alleged property fraud and forgery. Effective immediately, your inheritance claim is suspended. You may retain private counsel. Denise sucked in a breath. Charles stood suddenly, fists clenched, his face darkening with something uglier than anger. Wounded pride. We took you in, he snarled, his voice cracking in the corners. We gave you everything. You were never one of us? The judge raised a hand. Mr. Mitchell. But it was too late. I stood slowly, meeting Charles's eyes. No, I said softly. I wasn't. He blinked. I was always someone you thought you could shape. Control. Abandon. I stepped away from the table, the silence behind me like a broken wall. Claire followed, her heels sharp against the floor. Denise still hadn't moved. Not even when Charles sat back down, head in his hands, as if the weight had finally found him. ChatGPT, Jan Noi. Kong Tso Fan Quiet Nao Ko. Desua Chua Nhung Gi. Ho Ja Fa Hui. But someone sitting beside you can show you what's left. The sun was bleeding gold across Evelyn's study, casting warm slants of light through the greenhouse windows where jasmine vines curled along the old frame. The room smelled like rosemary and memory. I hadn't been in here since the day Claire gave me the box of Evelyn's letters. I hadn't had the courage. Until now. I dusted the old frames slowly, the ones Evelyn never got around to, hanging again after her last renovation. Photos of Claire, younger, laughing in that unguarded way she rarely did in the present. And me too. Chubby cheeks and scraped knees, standing awkwardly beside Evelyn at some picnic I barely remembered. But the photo had been preserved. Framed. I found a drawer half stuck and forced it open with a little grunt. Inside, a stack of dried lavender and a folded paper. My handwriting. One of the letters I wrote in those first weeks after waking up. The kind I never sent. Rage in ink. Confusion turned into pleading. Why did you leave me? And wasn't I enough? I set it on the desk beside a fresh page and began to write. Not to them, just to the part of me that still whispered that I should have done more. But halfway through, I stopped. My pen hovered. I didn't need to finish it. Not anymore. The door creaked softly, and Claire stepped in. She didn't knock. She never knocked anymore. She didn't say, "Are you okay?" because she knew I wasn't. Instead, she crossed the room and sat on the bench beside the window, her knees pulled up under her chin. She watched me for a long moment, then looked away. "I used to think Evelyn kept all these plants alive because she liked the way they smelled," she said. "But I think it's because she knew how many times things need to grow back before they're strong." I didn't reply. I sat on the floor and leaned against the base of the desk, the letter still half written in front of me. "I don't think I'll ever stop wishing they had loved me," I admitted. "Even now, even after all of this." Claire nodded. "That's not weakness. That's the part of you they couldn't kill." I looked at her. "But it still hurts." "I know." She slid down beside me, the setting sun brushing her face with amber. "But you weren't meant to win their love. You were meant to find your own life." I let that settle. It didn't fix anything, but it did. Release something. The knot in my chest, the echo of courtroom ceilings and hospital ceilings and too many ceilings I'd stared at, wondering why no one was coming. "Whitman came by earlier," Claire said. "Dropped off the final paperwork. He said he's heading to Chicago for another case." "Did he look tired?" I asked. "He looked like someone who got justice and still wants more." I smiled. "Sounds familiar." She reached over and laced her fingers through mine. There was no ceremony to it, just presence. Outside the greenhouse, the evening cicadas had begun their humming. Life, noisy and persistent. I picked up the unsent letter and walked to the small wood-burning stove Evelyn had used for winter warmth. I opened the door, fed the paper inside, and watched it curl into ember and ash. Claire raised an eyebrow. "I needed to let it go," I said. She didn't press. When the last of the letter vanished, I turned back toward the room and toward her. "I don't know what happens now," I said. Claire tilted her head. "We live." I chuckled. "Then let's start living it." I didn't wait to hear the will. I already knew who I was. The room was draped in velvet silence, the kind reserved for mausoleums and secrets too long buried. Walnut-paneled walls, solemn chairs set in symmetrical rows, and a long mahogany table at the front where the estate attorney sat, flipping through the embossed pages of the final document. The Mitchells had gathered like ghosts. Charles absent by court order, Denise somewhere nursing the collapse of her lies. Only Victoria remained, sitting 2 rows back, hands tight in her lap, her face pale and unreadable. Her eyes flicked toward me now and then, but she said nothing. I didn't sit. I walked forward. The attorney looked up. "Ms. Mitchell." "I'm not staying," I said. I placed a folded letter in the center of the table. That's all I needed to leave behind. He hesitated, then nodded solemnly. The envelope was sealed with the same wax Evelyn had once used. I had found it tucked in a drawer in her study, and somehow it felt right. The letter wasn't addressed to anyone by name. It didn't need to be. I forgive what I needed to. I forget what I must. I left the room without looking back. Outside, the air smelled like damp grass and hydrangea. Evelyn's garden was in bloom, lavender swaying gently in the early July breeze. Sunlight streaked through the pergola, catching on the wind chimes she'd hung years ago. Soft, metallic notes that didn't ask for attention but lingered if you listened. Claire stood by the trellis, arms crossed, watching with an expression I could only describe as proud, and maybe a little relieved. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. I kept walking. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes as I passed the hedges, turning toward the outer gate. I'd arranged for the moving van to meet me later that afternoon. Not for boxes of possessions, but for the last few things I actually wanted to carry. Evelyn's letters, a few garden tools, a single-framed photo of the 3 of us. "Rachel!" The voice behind me cracked, and I turned. Victoria. She jogged to catch up, heels catching awkwardly on the stones. She was breathless, not from the run, but from something older. Guilt, maybe. "I didn't know," she said, her voice trembling. not everything. Not the way they. She faltered. I didn't know until it was too late. I looked at her, not with anger, not even pain, just recognition. I did, I said quietly. That's why I wrote the letter. She nodded once, like a child accepting a truth too big to argue with. Her eyes shone and she didn't try to hug me. For that, I was grateful. I left her there, at the edge of the garden, standing beside the place where Evelyn had once planted white orchids. At the county office later that day, the woman behind the desk slid the form across and tapped the signature line. Legal name change to Rachel Evelyn? Yes, I said. My voice didn't waver. She handed me the final stamped document. You'll receive the certificate in the mail. By the time evening wrapped the town in a hush of indigo and street lamp glow, I stood in front of a small rental house on the edge of Maple Street. It wasn't big. It wasn't grand. But it had a mailbox with my name, a kitchen with cracked tiles, and the faint smell of cinnamon from the previous tenant. I pushed the door open. There was a note taped to the fridge. Welcome home, Rachel Evelyn. Handwritten. The loops were too wide to be Claire's. I didn't recognize the script. Maybe Whitman had arranged it, or maybe someone from Evelyn's old circle. It didn't matter. I smiled. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone who was surviving. I felt like someone who had arrived. Betrayed and discarded, she rose not just to survive, but to reclaim what was stolen. The courtroom did not restore the years lost, but it unmasked every lie and shattered every illusion they had built to keep her silent. Justice, it turns out, isn't always loud or swift. It waits, gathers strength in silence, and strikes when the truth can no longer be denied. Like rain after a drought, it may come late, but it washes everything clean. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't retribution. It's walking away free, with your name restored and your past behind you. Like, share, and subscribe to support more powerful stories like this. Comment 1 if you felt deeply connected to her journey, or 2 if there's something you'd change.